The first light had not yet touched the surface of the Pacific when a lonely silhouette moved across the dark water, its engines humming with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Inside the cockpit, the crew could see little beyond the faint glow of red instrument lights and the shifting texture of waves below. Yet they knew that somewhere out there, beyond the horizon and the night, history was waiting for them. In the Pacific War, dawn often decided the fate of thousands. This was no slick fighter, no fast bomber built for glory. It was a PBY Catalina, a WWII flying boat so slow that its own crews joked it was a clay pigeon with engines. But on this morning, speed meant nothing. What mattered was the ability to endure, to search mile after empty mile until the truth revealed itself. They had done this routine hundreds of times, lift off in darkness, sweep the ocean, and return long after the sun had set. But today felt different. The air seemed tighter. The silence felt heavier. Somewhere over the curve of the earth, an enemy fleet was moving. And the question that hung in the cabin was simple, heavy, and unmistakably human. Would they find it before it found them? The moment the Catalina's hull lifted off the water at Midway that morning, the men aboard knew they were stepping into a stretch of sky where survival depended on patience more than power. The PBY Catalina, a WWII flying boat that could barely outrun a modern truck, was the Navy's best hope of solving the greatest problem of the Pacific War, finding the enemy in an ocean too vast to comprehend. It was June 4th, 1942, and no one at Midway knew where the Japanese carriers were, only that they were coming. Lieutenant Howard Addy had flown these long arcs for months. His crew knew the rhythm by heart. Take off before dawn, climb to cruising altitude, line up on a compass heading, and sweep the ocean in silent concentration. There was little drama in it, just hours of monotony, the hum of radial engines, and the steady search for shapes that rarely appeared. But routine can be its own form of tension. Every flight carried the possibility that nothing would happen, until everything did. That morning, the air felt different, as if the horizon itself were bracing for impact. Midway had been on high alert for 3 days. Every pilot had been briefed, every bomber fueled, every marine fighter on standby. The Japanese strike force, 4 carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, was somewhere beyond the curve of the earth. If the Americans failed to locate it, the Battle of Midway would begin with the island engulfed in fire. Addy's PBY Catalina flew northwest on its assigned 45-degree search sector, crawling across the sky at 115 miles per hour. At that speed, every mile felt earned. The crew stared down through the haze, scanning for the smallest break in the pattern of waves, anything that did not belong. The Catalina could fly low and slow, enough to study individual whitecaps, an ability no land-based bomber could match. It was not built to fight. It was built to witness. 180 miles from Midway, the routine broke. Addy's co-pilot stiffened. There, on the faintest edge of the horizon, rose dark columns of smoke. Not one plume, not two. Many. It was the unmistakable signature of a fleet at high speed. The Catalina turned toward it, descending to 1,000 feet as the shapes began to emerge from the morning haze. Carriers, battleships, escorts, the main striking force of the Imperial Navy. The radio operator tapped out the message that would alter the course of the Pacific War. 2 carriers and main body, bearing 3 to 20, distance 180 miles, course 1 to 35, speed 25 knots. It was 0534 hours. In that moment, the Battle of Midway began in earnest, not with bombs or torpedoes, but with a sighting report sent from a slow, unarmored flying boat. What followed would become legend, but it all hinged on these minutes in the early morning light, when a handful of men in a WWII flying boat found what every commander in the Pacific was desperate to see. Long before the smoke on the horizon at Midway, the Navy had understood a truth that would shape the Pacific War. Battles are won not only by firepower, but by reach. And no aircraft reached farther than the PBY Catalina. Designed in the mid-1930s, it had none of the elegance of a fighter or the brute force of a bomber. Instead, engineers gave it something far more valuable for a war fought across an ocean: endurance. The Catalina's signature silhouette, a parasol wing perched above a boat-shaped fuselage, was not made for beauty. It was made to hold fuel. Tanks filled the hull. Tanks filled the wings. Every pocket of unused space became another cell for gasoline. In the air, the aircraft felt less like a plane and more like a patient machine built to outlast the horizon. Among Allied crews, it was common to joke that the WWII flying boat was a fuel tank that happened to fly. But in the endless expanse of the Pacific, that was exactly what the Navy needed. Its twin Pratt & Whitney engines could run for 20 hours without rest. Its cruising speed barely exceeded highway traffic, but that slow pace allowed crews to fly low, 500 feet, sometimes less, studying the ocean with human eyes rather than relying on instruments alone. In an era before airborne radar became widespread, the Catalina's ability to see, truly see, gave it an advantage no faster aircraft possessed. But the aircraft's endurance meant little without the men who served inside it. Life aboard a PBY Catalina was a quiet test of patience and resilience. Behind the cockpit lay narrow bunks where off-duty crew tried to sleep through engine noise that rattled every rib of the fuselage. A tiny galley, little more than a hot plate, a kettle, and a metal shelf, served as their kitchen. The coffee was constant. Canned food was routine. Over the course of the Pacific War, Vienna sausages became both an inside joke and a symbol of the long, lonely hours above the sea. Comfort did not exist. Early in the war, the cabin had no heating system. Flying in the North Pacific, crews wrapped themselves in blankets and sat close to the bulkheads for warmth. In the South Pacific, sunlight turned the aircraft's blister windows into greenhouses that baked the crew through their uniforms. Sweat and numb fingers were part of the job. Still, the men adapted. They rotated positions to stay alert. Pilots traded duties in steady shifts. Gunners leaned against the blisters, watching for shapes on the water that might mean danger or survival. And as the war expanded, so did the Catalina's reach. From Alaska to Australia, across island chains barely large enough to appear on maps, the WWII flying boat became the Allied eye on the ocean. The PBY Catalina could launch from lagoons too small for airstrips and return to harbors that were little more than sheltered coves. In a conflict defined by distance, it brought the horizon closer each day, one slow mile at a time. As the Pacific War intensified, the missions of the PBY Catalina began to evolve. What had started as a slow, methodical watcher of the sea soon became something far more dangerous and far more unpredictable. When daylight skies became dominated by Japanese fighters, American crews searched for an advantage in the only hours the enemy could not fully command, the darkness. That was when the Black Cat squadrons were born. Crews stripped the Catalina of its blue-gray paint and coated every surface, wings, hull, even the national insignia, in matte black. At night, a WWII flying boat of that size should have been impossible to hide. Yet, under a moonless sky, the aircraft dissolved into the darkness. Pilots learned to use island silhouettes to mask their approaches, flying at altitudes so low that waves sometimes broke against the hull. The Catalina, once a symbol of patient reconnaissance, became a predator. Their targets were the fast destroyers of the Tokyo Express, ships that ran supplies to Japanese forces under cover of night. Anti-aircraft guns waited on every deck. Searchlights scanned the waves. But the Black Cats attacked from angles the enemy never expected. They dropped bombs, depth charges, even improvised weapons when nothing else was available. One crew famously lobbed homemade Molotov cocktails through the open blister windows, watching the flames scatter across the deck of a Japanese submarine. The risks were constant and unforgiving. Flying a large, slow aircraft at wave height in darkness was its own form of gambling. The horizon could vanish without warning. A moment of disorientation could send a Catalina into the sea. Even without enemy fire, crews were lost to fog, weather, mechanical failures, and the simple cruelty of the night. Of the original Black Cat aircraft deployed to Guadalcanal, more than half were gone within 2 months. Yet the successes were undeniable. On February 21st, 1943, Lieutenant William Goff and his crew approached a Japanese destroyer near Colombangara. Hidden against the dark mass of the island, they closed the distance until the ship's wake glowed white beneath them. 2 500-pound bombs fell from the Catalina. Both hit. The destroyer erupted in flame and slid beneath the water, a testament to what a patient, deliberate attack could achieve. But the Catalina's greatest legacy did not come from delivering destruction. It came from saving lives. By 1943, as operations stretched across thousands of miles, American air crews faced a new and relentless danger, going down over open water with no guarantee of rescue. The PBY Catalina changed that. These search and rescue missions, later known as Dumbo missions, became lifelines for pilots who once believed that ditching meant certain death. Crews risked everything, landing in high swells or enemy-controlled waters to pull survivors aboard. Some rescues became legend. Eddie Rickenbacker, America's greatest ace of the First World War, survived 24 days adrift before a Catalina spotted his raft. Lieutenant Nathan Gordon made 3 landings under enemy fire to save 15 men near Kavieng, earning the Medal of Honor. But most rescues were quiet, unrecorded acts of humanity. Moments when a slow WWII flying boat slammed into rough water, held itself together, and lifted broken men from the edge of death. In the long night of the Pacific War, the Black Cats struck fear, but the rescue crews restored hope. Across the enormous distances of the Pacific War, the PBY Catalina did more than fly missions. It reshaped how commanders understood the battlefield. In a theater where fleets could disappear into the horizon, where storms erased entire task forces from sight, the Catalina became a bridge between uncertainty and decision. Its reports shaped carrier strikes. Its radar guidance led ships through blinding fog. Its quiet presence over distant seas taught strategists a lesson that would echo far beyond the 1940s. Information is the first weapon of modern war. American commanders quickly realized that the Catalina's endurance could anchor a new style of warfare. Long before airborne, early warning systems existed. Modified PBYs carrying early radar acted as the Navy's first eyes in bad weather or darkness. During the Aleutian Campaign, radar-equipped Catalinas guided surface ships through conditions so disorienting that vessels sometimes lost sight of each other. Without those slow-moving aircraft, the assault on Attu would have unfolded in chaos. But the Catalina's impact went far beyond the U.S. Navy. Across the world, Allied nations embraced the aircraft for the same reason America had. It could reach where nothing else could. The Royal Air Force flew Catalinas across the North Atlantic, hunting U-boats that haunted Allied convoys. The Royal Canadian Air Force guarded remote coastlines where storms were harsher than any enemy. The Soviet Navy used them in the Arctic, where daylight vanished for months and the cold tested every bolt and fitting. In Australia, crews flew milk run missions into isolated waters controlled by Japanese forces, delivering supplies and retrieving coast watchers whose intelligence often proved invaluable. Even Japanese commanders were forced to adapt. The nighttime strikes of the Black Cat squadrons disrupted supply routes that had once operated with confidence. Destroyers dimmed their lights. Crews posted extra lookouts. Ships altered the routes or slowed to avoid predictable channels. Fear of a slow, unseen WWII flying boat shifted behavior across entire regions. For many families across America, Australia, Canada, and Britain, the story of the Catalina is personal. Fathers, uncles, and grandfathers served on these long, lonely flights, missions without fanfare, where monotony and danger coexisted hour after hour. Their work rarely made headlines, but it made victories possible. In a global conflict fought by nations and empires, the PBY Catalina proved that reach, patience, and clarity could shape the course of history just as surely as firepower. When the guns finally fell silent in August 1945, the vast ocean that had once swallowed entire fleets lay calm again. But the legacy of the PBY Catalina, the slow, patient WW-2 flying boat that had watched those waters day after day, remained written across every mile of the Pacific. From that first sighting of Midway's horizon to the last rescue flights near Japan, the Catalina's story was never about glory. It was about endurance, discipline, and the quiet courage of crews who understood that victory often begins long before the first shot is fired. Look back at the morning of the Battle of Midway. A handful of men aboard a humble patrol aircraft found a fleet that should have remained hidden. Their report shaped the turning point of the Pacific War. Yet ask any survivor of those early patrols, and most would say the same thing. Lieutenant Howard Addy said years later, they were simply doing their job. For them, heroism felt like routine, flying straight lines over empty water, trusting that their slow-moving aircraft would carry them home again. But routine can change history. The same aircraft that spotted enemy carriers also slipped into darkness with the Black Cat squadrons, striking Japanese ships from angles no one expected. The same flying boat that hunted submarines and scouted remote coastlines also slammed into rough seas to pull exhausted men from drifting rafts. Thousands survived because someone in a Catalina refused to give up. After the war, many PBY Catalina aircraft kept flying, carrying passengers to remote islands, fighting forest fires, or serving small nations whose pilots trusted the same rugged strength that had endured the Pacific storms of 1942. A few still soar today, their wings casting shadows on waters once scarred by war. They are reminders of an era when technology was simple, but commitment was absolute. And perhaps that is the true legacy of this quiet giant. In a world often dazzled by speed and firepower, the Catalina proved that patience, vision, and resolve can shape the course of events. It showed that information, earned slowly, mile after mile, can decide a war as surely as any weapon. So, as you reflect on this story, I invite you to think about the lessons it leaves behind. In modern conflict, what matters more? The power to destroy or the power to see clearly? Share your thoughts below. And if you value these stories of courage and innovation from history's greatest conflict, stay with us. There are more chapters to uncover, more voices to honor, and more journeys like the PBY Catalina waiting just beyond the horizon.